Welcome back to the Deep Dive. If you ever thought about learning a new language, maybe English specifically, but then felt, a bit overwhelmed before you even started, well, this deep dive is definitely for you.
Yeah, it really is. Our mission today is pretty laser focused. We're pulling together the core arguments and, importantly, the really practical, actionable advice from our sources. This is for anyone who's right at the beginning, embarking on that initial journey, which, let's be honest, can feel pretty daunting of mastering English.
That's exactly right. We're diving into a set of sources that, well, they almost act like a foundational guide for the beginner learner. They aren't just about motivation, though that's there. They're also deeply strategic.
Strategic, okay.
Yeah. So our job today is to unpack these key insights. We need to define the huge benefits, that's the external why, and then critically link that directly to the kind of psychological mindset you need and the basic daily tactics that are required for, a really successful start. Okay, let's unpack this then. What I found really compelling about this source material is how it immediately gives you a clear structure. It tackles the whole beginner's journey, like holistically. So we're going to start by establishing that big motivational why, how learning English actually opens concrete, genuinely transformative doors around the world.
Right.
Then we absolutely have to confront the psychological what. Well, we need to talk about that nervousness, that anxiety that, well, it seems like almost all beginners feel.
It's so common.
And finally, we'll break down the practical, how the specific daily kind of low stakes advice that turns this vague idea of I want to learn English into sustainable, real action.
And that consensus that's established right from the start, it's critical. It really shapes the whole journey because it shifts the learner's perspective from the get-go.
Yeah.
The sources, they immediately frame learning English not just as like a hobby or some abstract school subject.
It's not just academic.
No. They frame it as a fundamental power. It's described as something that actively opens many doors and can fundamentally change the opportunities available to the learner.
And I really think that foundational perspective is essential, isn't it?
Yeah.
Before we even get into the nitty-gritty of grammar rules or vocab lists, the sources hit you with this massive dose of motivation.
Yeah, they really do.
They talk about it with such clear enthusiasm.
Huh.
Strong encouragement. It repositions the whole effort. It's like you're not just learning a subject, you're actually acquiring this foundational tool for empowerment. A key, really, that unlocks entire systems.
A key. I like that. Okay, so let's talk about those systems, those doors. If we analyze the immediate sort of broad benefits mentioned in the source material, they seem to fall pretty neatly into three big categories.
Okay.
These really show why the commitment, the initial effort, and maybe psychological cost is worth it. So the first door they identify is access to global movement, the idea that learning English helps in travel.
Right. And when you first hear that, you might just think of the basics, ordering a coffee, asking, where's the bathroom? Maybe figuring out airport signs.
The transactional stuff.
Exactly, the transactional stuff. But the implication, as we kind of dug into the sources, it covers so much more than just basic navigation, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. True fluency, or even just like a moderate conversational level, it completely transforms the travel experience. It's the difference between being, say, a passive tourist, just clicking photos and relying on a translation app.
Yeah, head down on your phone.
And being an active, engaged participant in whatever local or international community you're visiting, you can actually talk to people.
That makes sense. And to really grasp the scale of this benefit, you have to think about English's global role, right?
Yep.
As that common lingua franca, the sort of universal bridge language in basically all major international systems.
It really is everywhere.
Think about the technical side, the professional use. English is the standard language for global aviation.
Yep. Air traffic control.
Maritime operations, shipping, and increasingly, international finance, emergency services. If you're in any kind of unexpected situation, maybe you miss a flight connection in a huge hub airport, or you need help from someone who isn't a native speaker somewhere else in the world, having English is just a massive safety net. It's a tool for navigating things independently.
That's the safety and utility aspect. Yeah, and it's huge. Can't underestimate that. But beyond just utility, it's also about the ability to connect, right?
Yeah.
To actually engage with local people who might not speak your native language, but they use English maybe for work or just as their second language.
And that conversation, that's where the real cultural exchange happens, I think.
Totally.
You move past just buying something or asking for directions, and you start actually sharing stories, maybe understanding a bit of local humor, gaining insights you just never get on a guided tour.
Right. You're off the script.
Exactly. Without English skills, you're kind of confined to that official prepackaged tourist bubble. With it, you get real independence, real agency. Absolutely. So that's door number one. Travel, movement, connection. The second door is just as fundamental, maybe even more so for like long-term personal growth, unlocking knowledge. The source explicitly says English helps in education. Yeah, and this one I really believe is probably the single biggest systemic benefit globally. It links right back to that idea of democratizing information access.
How so?
Well, think about it. If you look at the vast majority of specialized research, the top academic journals, the main textbooks for advanced science, tech, engineering, business, just an overwhelming amount of that core knowledge is first published or archived or primarily shared in English.
Yeah, that's undeniable. And what's fascinating here is we're not just talking about, university courses you might take abroad. We're talking about the entire infrastructure of global knowledge.
The whole system.
Yeah. I mean, studies have shown something like 95% of all scientific papers published worldwide are either written entirely in English or at least include an English abstract. That creates a massive, a power dynamic.
It really does.
Without English proficiency, you're essentially locked out of that huge pool of global scholarly communities, the latest research. If you're trying to get into a highly specialized or, cutting-edge field, the materials you need might simply not exist in translation.
Well, if they do, they might be years behind the original publication, right? So you're always playing catch-up.
Exactly. It means language proficiency becomes this gateway. It dictates your access to specialized, advanced learning materials that are otherwise just gone. It sets the ceiling for how much you can learn on your own, basically.
So whether you're trying to read the latest medical research or access documentation for open source coding projects or follow a lecture from a top university that's posted online, English ability determines the breadth and depth of information you can actually consume.
It essentially bypasses geography and institutional walls. The internet becomes a truly global library, but only if you have the key.
Which is English
in
this case. Right. And then that brings us to the third door. This one tackles the personal, the social, the emotional side, even making new friends. The human element.
Yeah, and maybe this is the door that gives the deepest kind of human satisfaction. It often gets overlooked when we just focus on careers or academics.
It really does. I mean, travel and education are obviously important drivers, but that deep satisfaction often comes from real shared connection with other people, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The sources highlight that English allows for building relationships across cultural lines. It's not just asking for directions or buying things. It lets you share personal stories, understand humor, maybe irony, build actual trust that goes beyond national borders.
Yeah, building real rapport.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the implication is that English acts as this powerful social connector. It broadens your social circle internationally. I mean, in today's world, with so much remote work and global teams.
Right. Your colleagues could be anywhere.
Exactly. Your future colleagues, collaborators, maybe even close friends could be from dozens of different countries, all potentially linked by this one common language. It lets you participate fully in a global community, which hopefully fosters empathy and understanding through that shared experience.
Okay. So the why seems incredibly clear. English gives you these concrete, life-changing benefits in travel, in education, and in building friendships. The motivation should be sky high.
You'd think so. So now we have to tackle the paradox. If the motivation is so high, why do so many people seem to fizzle out or just stop within the first few weeks of starting?
Yes, the million-dollar question. And this is where the sources pivot immediately from the aspirational why to the core psychological problem that, frankly, every language teacher and learner recognizes instantly. Many beginners feel nervous when they start.
That feeling, it raises that crucial question. Why? Why is this nervousness so widespread? We just laid out all these amazing, empowering benefits, yet taking that first step feels paralyzing for so many. Well, this intense anxiety seems to come from a few connected things, but mainly it's rooted in the fear of being judged publicly, which comes out as performance anxiety.
It feels like a huge cognitive load issue too, right? As a beginner, you're trying to do so many things at once. You're trying to remember vocabulary.
Yep.
Apply grammar rules that often feel totally arbitrary.
Often are.
Make sure your pronunciation is okay, and try to form a coherent thought, all while feeling pressured, maybe in front of someone who actually speaks the language well.
It's overwhelming, and that overload leads straight to self-censorship. People often know the word, or they kind of know the right tense, but the fear of saying it wrong, mispronouncing it, using the rule incorrectly, just stops them from speaking at all. It creates what linguists sometimes call the silent period.
Ah, the silent period. I've heard of that.
Yeah, and it's a fascinating phase. It's necessary, actually, that period where you're absorbing a lot of input without necessarily producing much output. But it's also really emotionally draining because you feel like you should be able to perform, but you can't. The anxiety just builds and builds.
The emotional barrier, that fear of failing or maybe looking stupid, that's the real blocker.
I think it often is, yeah. Think about it. When you make a little slip up in your native language, you just correct yourself. No big deal. But when you make a mistake in a language you're learning, it can feel like this huge public indictment of your intelligence.
Yeah, that rings true. And maybe it's compounded by a kind of imposter syndrome.
Right.
Because you can understand some things, maybe you know the concept you want to express, or you recognize the grammar rule on paper.
Right.
You feel like you should be able to just execute it perfectly, which is, of course, a completely impossible standard for a beginner.
Totally impossible. Yeah. And that gap between your internal knowledge or understanding and your actual external performance, it creates immense stress.
Okay, so the sources recognize this. They see that the necessary next step then is moving from understanding the external why, those amazing doors English opens, to dealing with the internal how. How do you manage these emotional parts of the journey?
Exactly. Because you can know all the benefits in the world, but if that psychological barrier stops you from actually opening your mouth and trying, well, those doors stay shut.
And you can't just tell a nervous person, hey, don't be nervous.
Never works.
It just doesn't work. So the sources understand this. They know the nervousness needs specific, practical solutions. Things that lower the emotional stakes and give you a clear, achievable path forward. Ways to tackle the anxiety head-on with tasks that feel manageable.
And the advice they give in the sources, it feels brilliantly designed, actually, to mitigate exactly this nervousness. It works by reducing that perceived risk and by setting goals that are so small, so manageable, that failure isn't some huge catastrophe. It's just a minor, maybe even expected detour.
Yeah.
It shifts the learner's focus away from the really high-stakes, distant goal of mastery and brings it right down to the low-stakes, immediate process of just building a daily habit.
Okay, that makes sense. It connects directly to the practical toolkit the sources provide. They offer these 3 specific pieces of advice that seem to work together perfectly to counteract that beginner anxiety and help foster real, measurable growth.
So the first piece of advice is a really fundamental strategy for stopping that cognitive overwhelm we talked about. Start small. Start small. It sounds simple, but it's the antidote to that paralyzing feeling of having too much information thrown at you. I mean, if a beginner tries to memorize 50 irregular verbs and read a dense article from The Economist on day 1.
Yeah, recipe for disaster. Exactly.
Yeah.
They're almost guaranteed to burn out and feel like a failure immediately. So the sources give a very concrete method for this start small strategy. Listen to short English stories. Okay, why specifically short stories? And why listening?
Well, the short stories part connects directly to something called compelling comprehensible input, or CCI. Short stories give you a complete narrative arc, a beginning, middle, end, and concentrated vocabulary, but all within a manageable time frame.
Ah, so you actually finish something.
Precisely. You get that swift sense of completion, of accomplishment, and that feeling that I did it is a massive confidence booster. It directly fights back against that feeling of failure or overwhelm.
Okay, that makes sense. And the listening part.
Crucially, the focus is deliberately put on auditory input first. Listening before requiring active production, which is speaking the activity that usually generates the most nervousness.
Right.
Listening helps build familiarity with the rhythm of the language, the cadence, the natural flow, how things actually sound, without demanding that you instantly produce error-free speech yourself. It lets your brain absorb the structure more subconsciously.
It's a really important distinction, isn't it? It's like
That.
filling the well before you ask someone to draw water from it.
That's a great analogy.
Listening to short, simple stuff lowers the risk of failure dramatically, while still rapidly building up that necessary foundation of understanding sound and meaning. We have to remember, babies learn their first language by listening for, what, years sometimes? Before anyone expects them to form complex sentences.
Exactly. We need to replicate that low-stakes immersion environment as much as possible. Okay, so start small with listening to short stories. That input strategy then seems to pair perfectly with the second piece of advice, the discipline of consistency. The sources really emphasize the need to practice daily. daily practice.
But I have to push back on this a little, just playing devil's advocate. If I'm super busy, wouldn't it be more effective to block out, say, one big 4-hour chunk on a Saturday morning, really immerse myself, rather than trying to find tiny, maybe interrupted 10-minute slots every single day? Isn't intensity sometimes better than just plain old consistency?
That's a really common thought, and it seems logical on the surface, but actually the sources, and frankly the neuroscience behind learning, they overwhelmingly support consistency over intensity.
Really? Why?
Well, analyzing the power of daily habits reveals that even very short, consistent efforts add up incredibly dramatically over time compared to infrequent marathon study sessions. But maybe even more importantly, the material actually sticks better with daily practice.
Okay, why does it stick better?
It's down to principles like spaced repetition and how our brains consolidate memories.
Okay, explain consolidation. Why is daily better for the brain?
So when you learn something new, your brain needs time to process that information and file it away into long-term memory. And a lot of that crucial filing work happens most efficiently while you sleep.
Oh.
If you have one massive 4-hour session, you flood your brain with a huge amount of data, sure. But then, because you don't revisit it soon, that information starts to decay really rapidly. Infrequent long sessions often lead to quick forgetting and that really frustrating feeling of having to constantly relearn the same things over and over.
Yeah, that's demotivating.
Totally. Daily practice, even just 10 or 15 minutes listening to a short story or quickly reviewing some flashcards, it triggers the reinforcement loop. It constantly signals to your brain, hey, this stuff is important. Keep it accessible.
Okay, so practicing daily, even for just a short burst, makes it less about a huge, daunting effort and more about building a sustainable habit. It minimizes forgetting, keeps the vocabulary fresh. It kind of shifts the goal away from, I need to achieve mastery, to the much simpler discipline of, I just need to show up today.
Exactly. Show up consistently. And this leads us right into what I think is maybe the most philosophical, but also the most critical piece of advice in the toolkit. It's the one that directly tackles that core psychological barrier, the nervousness we talked about earlier.
Right. Here's where it gets really interesting, I think, because this piece of advice gives the beginner the psychological permission slip they desperately need. The sources essentially command the learner, don't be afraid of mistakes.
Yes.
Yes. This is the absolute core philosophy that true language acquisition really pivots on. And the sources provide that critical follow-up statement. Mistakes are part of learning.
It's a complete redefinition of failure, isn't it?
Completely. A mistake isn't a sign you're incompetent. It's not a roadblock. It's certainly not something to be embarrassed about. According to this view, it is essential, non-negotiable feedback.
Because if you're too scared to make a mistake, you just won't speak. Or you'll stick to only the things you know perfectly. Right. And if you don't speak or if you don't try new things, you never test the boundaries of what you actually know, and you definitely don't get the feedback you need to grow. So mistakes aren't just okay, they're actually active data points. They are the engine driving improvement. That's the key analytical insight that every beginner needs to internalize. You can even think about it like language hypothesis testing. When you learn a language, your brain is constantly building this internal model of how the grammar works, how sounds are made.
Okay.
Every time you make an error, say you use the wrong verb tense or mispronounce a word, you've just gathered crucial data about where your current internal model is inaccurate or incomplete. The mistake literally tells you, okay, this boundary needs adjusting.
Wow. So the error itself is the most specific, personalized teaching you could possibly receive at that moment.
Exactly. Without that data, without pushing those boundaries and seeing what happens, your internal model just never gets updated. So reframing error like this is absolutely essential for long-term progress and just for psychological survival, really.
And psychologically, this feels like the ultimate release valve. This advice directly fights that beginner's nervousness we identified. If you truly embrace the idea that making a mistake isn't just allowed, but actually a necessary, required step towards learning, like an experiment that yielded useful data even if it didn't succeed,
then the pressure just lifts, doesn't it? It gives the learner permission to be imperfect, which is the only way you can actually move towards proficiency without being paralyzed by self-censorship. Permission to be imperfect. That's perfectly put. Okay, so we've got the powerful motivation, the why, we've got the detailed practical toolkit. Start small, practice daily, embrace mistakes. Now, the sources conclude with a really essential message about the long-term reality of this journey. right? They acknowledge it's not all easy sailing after the first week. They offer some final words of encouragement. They do. They basically summarize the sustained commitment needed in two really profound but also very succinct phrases. Keep practicing and never give up. Okay, let's analyze the relationship between those two final instructions. Keep practicing. Feels very technical, doesn't it? It reinforces that daily habit we just talked about from Section 3. It emphasizes sustainability, the mechanical application of effort over time. It's acknowledging, okay, the process doesn't stop when you finish your first short story. You have to keep the routine going.
Exactly. That's the behavioral part. And then never give up. That's where the mental fortitude comes in. This is the psychological advice you need when the initial excitement, that early buzz you get from making rapid progress, what some experts call the honeymoon phase.
Yeah, when things feel easy at first.
Right, when that inevitably fades. Because learning a language always involves hitting frustrating plateaus. Periods where you feel like you're working just as hard, but your progress feels agonizingly slow, or maybe even non-existent. The dreaded intermediate slump.
Ugh, the plateau. And when you hit that voice of self-doubt, the nervousness we talked about in Section 2, it just screams louder, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The temptation to quit then is huge because the effort you're putting in doesn't seem to match the reward you're getting out. But the sources are clearly preparing the learner for this psychological battle. Never give up is that moral imperative, that instruction to push through those emotional dips. To understand that learning is almost never linear. Progress often happens in these invisible leaps, but only after periods of sustained, sometimes seemingly unproductive effort.
So this advice implies that the whole journey is inherently long. It requires sustained mental toughness, which is just as critical as the technical strategies like listening to stories or practicing daily.
Definitely. It suggests you need to integrate the process of learning the language into your identity somehow, which links right back to those massive doors we talked about in Section 1. You're not just trying to pass a test or finish a course book, you're fundamentally trying to change how you engage with the entire world.
Okay, so pulling it all together, what does this synthesis tell us? Success in learning English, at least according to these sources, seems to be this careful, powerful balance. First, you've got to identify those powerful external motivations the doors English opens, promising real-world access and opportunity. That gets you started.
Yep, the why. Second, you need to adopt manageable daily strategies, that low-stakes toolkit. Start small, practice consistently, and that's justified by how our brains actually learn, the how.
And finally, third, you absolutely must maintain essential psychological resilience, that commitment to keep going, to persevere, and crucially, to redefine mistakes not as failures, but as necessary progress data.
The mindset. It's a really holistic approach, isn't it? It ensures you have the motivation to start, the practical strategy to keep going day to day, and the mental resilience to handle the inevitable bumps in the road. It's not just about learning vocabulary. It's about cultivating the mindset that allows that vocabulary to actually stick and grow and be used.
Yeah, mindset is key. Okay, so just to briefly recap the main findings we've extracted from these sources today. We established that learning English is presented as a kind of power, something that opens really critical doors to travel, to advance education, and to building meaningful international friendships.
Right.
The 3 doors.
We confirmed that the process, especially at the start, inherently involves overcoming significant beginner nervousness. And the way to do that is by adopting 3 simple but really profound strategies.
Start small.
Yep. Start small, focusing on low-stakes listening, like short stories. Enforce the discipline of daily practice to help memory consolidation. And maybe most importantly, embrace mistakes. See them as essential, non-negotiable data points in your learning cycle.
And you, the listener, you now have this distilled wisdom, this synthesis on how to approach the very beginning of your English learning journey. It's like a strategic roadmap built on motivation, on brain science, and on resilience. It gives you not just encouragement, but actual concrete instructions.
And we want to leave you with one final thought, something to chew on, that comes directly from the source's core philosophy about making mistakes.
Okay.
If mistakes are truly an essential part of learning, maybe even the only way your brain really updates its internal language model, then maybe intentional action is needed to speed up that process a bit.
Intentional mistakes. Well, intentional attempts that might lead to mistakes. So we encourage you to consider this. What immediate small action could you take today, maybe right after listening to this, to intentionally make a new mistake in English? Okay, how would that work?
Maybe try using a new word you just learned, even if you're not 100% sure it's right. Or try forming a slightly more complex sentence than usual in a low-stakes situation, like writing comment online or even just talking to yourself. Push the boundary of your current knowledge just a little bit, and do it knowing that if an error happens, it's not a sign of failure. It's the clearest possible proof that you're actually progressing, that you're actively gathering the essential data your brain needs for growth.
So embrace the potential mistake as a sign you're learning. A mistake today means growth tomorrow.
Exactly.
That's a great place to end. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the power of language learning. We look forward to the next one.